Excellent. Okay. So last week we explored a number of big themes around Rus. We argued that it was the Megillah was structured as a transition from Vayibim Shvot HaShoftim, the era of the Shoftim, to the founding of the dynasty of David, the transition from the chaos of Ish Hayosha Ba'enov, which is liberating, energizing. When you read the Sefer of Shoftim, you have this enormous bubbling vibrancy, but also the most terrible breakdowns in society. Ishayosha B'Enov, very nice, everyone doing that which is straight in their eyes, but unfortunately not always is what people see as straight and good, actually the straight and the good. And the transition from the chaos of Shoftim to the structure of monarchy. And this is, in a sense, a book of Shmuel. It's written by Shmuel, along with Sefer Shoftim, which is written by Shmuel, and Sefer Shmuel, which is written by Shmuel. Shmuel is the Novi who ushers in the era of the Melachim, the appointment less successful of Shlomo and of Shaul, and then the more successful appointment of David. And that's one theme of the Sefer. Also interwoven into the Sefer is chesed, an idea of kindness. It's a story of a family, a pastoral story of a family, who difficult to understand why it even makes its way into Nach. I mean, it's a nice story, fine, of Rus and conversion, very important. But why is this a sort of national? My phone is not turned silent, so I apologize. But why is this a national story of why is this a story that finds its way into Nach? And one way of understanding the story is that it's in a sense arguing that the way to build society properly is starting from families and up. So it's both the story of relationships and the love of Rus to Naomi and how she changes her life and everything else, but also it's a story of big issues. What I want to do today is what we only started to do right at the end of the last year, which is start actually reading the Psukim in some depth. And also, I hope to touch on one of the other big themes of the Megillah that we haven't yet spoken about. I should mention, by the way, we did allude a little bit to another big theme, which I could have mentioned now also, which is the link between Moav, Rus, who comes from Moav, and the selfishness of Moav, that they don't come out to greet with bread. The link to Sodom, the almost parallelism that's built by the Novi in Shoftim when they describe this terrible incident and the breakdown of any Jewish decency that ought to exist in Shoftim, the almost Sodom-like story. So we're sort of playing with some of those ideas also. But let's just learn some psukim today, and then hopefully also have time to visit another big theme that emerges in Megillah. I want to say again that in the interest of Omer Davar B'Shem Omer and avoiding Chas v'Shalom plagiarizing also, as I said, about halfway through preparing this series, I came across this wonderful book by someone who I know nothing about called Moshe Miller, and by the time I've finished, I'm no longer sure exactly what's from him, what isn't, but a significant chunk of what I'm saying can be found in his work, and you can Google him and look him up. Okay, so Vayihi b'mei shefot hashoftim vayhi rav oretz. This is 1-1. First pasuk in Rus. We looked at this last time. I just want to remind you, it's locating it in the era of the Shoftim, which is what we saw. And Chazal see in this funny language of in the time when they judged the judges, that they're criticizing the judges. The judges have very little respect, and this ties into this theme that runs the whole way through Shoftim of Ein Melech Yisrael Ishayasha B'Enov. It's a lawless time, a time when things are not properly structured. We began analyzing this pasuk. This is pasuk base. It's a pasuk that begins with nameless characters, and only in the next pasuk is in pasuk base v'shema isheni melech v'shem ishtenami v'shem shneivan of machlon v'chilion. So this reminds us a little bit of the story of Vayikach Ish Beis Levi, Vayikach Ish Levi, Bas Levi, Beis Levi is Bas Levi. An anonymous figure from Levi goes and marries a Levite woman. The use of the anonymous pasuk and then only the name given later again is maybe suggesting that these are figures who, it's very clumsily phrased pasuk, right? It's sort of two-stage naming. Maybe is indicating they somehow lost their way of themselves. They're not. There's something anonymous about them. We also pointed out that the pasuk starts off in the singular, Vayelech ish mi beis lechem Yehuda, hu ve'ishto shnei vanov. So it sounds like he's the dominant character. It begins by saying a man went from beis lechem Yehuda, he and his wife and his two sons. The normal way to phrase this would be Vayelchu, they went mi beis lechem Yehuda, who ish ve'ishto shnei vanov. The family goes. So you say they went, the family went, or the husband, the wife, and the children went. This sounds like this is Elimelech's decision to go, and they are dragged along with him, perhaps indicating a unhealth in the family dynamic. And certainly from a sort of halachic point of view, also a husband can't force the wife to leave where the home has been set up against her will. The exceptions are, if anything, around going from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, but certainly not around going from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz. The final thing we pointed out, and this I want to explore a little more fully, is the Megillah seems, at least in Chazal's understanding, plays a lot with names. Chazal, and we're going to see this in a few moments, are Doresh. They see significance in the name Elimelech. They see significance in the name Naomi. Naomi herself spells out the significance later on in the story without giving the plot away. She says, don't call me Naomi anymore, pleasant, call me Mar, bitter. Machlon and Chilion, they are Doresh, their names, they understand significance of the names. Names features quite heavily in the story. At the beginning of the story, as we saw already, Elimelech and his sons are somewhat anonymous. They're not given a name. Later on in the story, a character called Anonymous is going to feature. Pliny Almoni, right? The famous Pliny Almoni, whose very name is Mr. Anonymous. So the Megillah is a Megillah that cares about names. It's interesting that where do they leave from? Beis Lechem. So they're leaving from the house of bread. It's probably called that name because seemingly it was a fertile part of Eretz Yisrael, where the granaries were, or it was the market where grain was traded, and that's where they're going when the famine breaks out. Here I just want to mention a sort of slightly bigger theme, which I either did or didn't touch on at the end of the last year, which is that journeys form a significant part of the Torah story. In fact, the whole Torah, in a sense, can be looked on as a travel book. It's the story of Avram journeying to Eretz Yisrael. If we had to summarize the whole story, really, the whole story of the Torah can be summarized as follows. Avram journeys from his place of origin, Haran, where his Ur custom, to Eretz Yisrael. He journeys down to Egypt, back to Eretz Yisrael, down to Palestine, back to Eretz Yisrael. Yaakov journeys down to Egypt, and then they set out on their journey back to Eretz Yisrael. That's really a summary of the whole Torah, and it finishes with them on the cusp of entering Eretz Yisrael. So it's a story of journeys. This is a journey story also, and it's a story of journeys often triggered by famine. That's the story of Avram having to go down to Egypt, Yitzchak going down to Gerar, to Palestine, Yaakov going down to Egypt again. So it's a story of leaving Eretz Yisrael because of famine. It also deals with a sort of perennial challenge which all of us face in our lives, and this is one of the themes that Rus is going to explore in more detail, which is actually how do we balance our values and our spiritual goals and our family aims with the toil of earning a parnasa. We all live in this state. Elimelech really is faced with a very extreme version of, in a more subtle way, something that we all have to balance. He's facing a famine which causes him to sell out his values and abdicate his responsibility as a leader and leave Eretz Yisrael, leave his people behind and not take responsibility. But the challenge of always how do you balance? Avram's told Lech Lecha, go to Eretz Yisrael. As soon as he arrives in Eretz Yisrael, the famine causes him to have to go down to Egypt. Was it the right decision or the wrong decision? We don't really know. The Ramban is critical of Avram for going down to Egypt after he's been told to go to Eretz Yisrael. So this is part of a bigger theme. When times get tough, it can lead to unity or it can lead to fragmentation. In this case, it's leading to fragmentation. It's leading to them leaving Eretz Yisrael, and they go of all places to Moav. Moav linked to Sodom, linked to the story of Lot, linked to the pasuk in Devarim. Lo yova Ammoni Moavi b'kal Hashem. You're not allowed to marry an Ammoni or Moavi. Why? Al davar shelo kodem eschem melechem, because they didn't come to greet you with bread. So these are the very people, belechem u'mayim. So the very people who didn't come to greet us with bread and water when we were traveling through the desert are the people that Elimelech decides to go to get bread because he's leaving Beis Lechem because there's a time of famine. Okay, so I think this is somewhat what we touched upon last time. Moving forward, V'shema ish Elimelech. Chazal dorish Elimelech in a number of ways. Either Eli Melech, to me, is the king. Malchus will come to me. In other words, he wants to be the leader. He wants to, perhaps he's sensing that the era of Shoftim isn't working so well, and that there's a new political model that will be emerging. People like being leaders. Today is the day that election's been declared. People like being leaders. Is any Melech wrong or right when he thinks he has kingship quality?
He was of the tribe of Yehuda.
Yes, he was of the tribe of Yehuda.
But I mean, he abdicated leadership by going away.
He does abdicate leadership. The story does end with ancestor of David being born. Rus marries Boaz. And in some ways, when she's doing that to continue the family lineage of her deceased husbands, Kilion, Machlon, and Kilion. And we're going to get to that theme later when we get to the Yibum concept, which hopefully we'll still get time to discuss today. But it seems he's not entirely wrong. Kingship could have descended from him. His near relative is Boaz, who does end up as the ancestor of Moshiach, the ancestor of David, I'm sorry. And Rus, his daughter-in-law, unsuccessfully, because it doesn't quite work out, does end up as the matriarch, as Aim HaMelech, as the mother of kings. So Elimelech may have been right that he's from the royal family, he's from Yehuda, he's potentially a future king. By the way, there is another meaning that you could give to Elimelech. What else could it mean? My name is Eliezer. What's the meaning of my name? Eliezer. God's my help, right? So Elimelech, God's my king. It could have been quite a nice name, right? So again, Chazal may be playing on this idea that Elimelech maybe presents himself as, God is my king. He's just the vehicle for awareness of Hashem in the world. But there's a part of him that thinks, Eli Melech, I can be the king. Yes.
Elimelech passes away, the implication being that he's not destined to be a leader. He's carrying control.
He proves to be a failed leader, and indeed he dies because he's wrong to have deserted the Jewish people at the time. But he is of the tribe who could have produced the king. He's from Shevet Yehuda, and he's an almost ancestor of the king because his kinman and Rus, in attempting to restore his family lineage, to get married, and out of them comes David HaMelech. So he's a failed king, but maybe he's not entirely wrong in seeing that things could have been different. He could have been a king. When someone has a dimion, an imagination of delusions of grandeur, it could just be delusions, or actually Eli Melech. He could have been something could have come from him.
Where there's an untimely death because somebody should have begged for mercy. Is it their generation that we didn't do so?
Yes, this is what the Pasuk seems to indicate, that his and his son's premature death is because of the abdication of responsibility. They should have, yeah. Okay, so that's Elimelech. And now his Nami is named. We'll look at Nami's names later. Machlon and Chilion are named. Again, the Medrash is Dorish their names. Machlon, from analogous to Megillah. When you're Mochel someone, you're forgiving them, you're erasing their debt or erasing their the claims or upset that you have against them. He's a figure who's going to be destroyed. Kilion also implying complete destruction. Kilion is destruction. Vayavos de Moav Vayusham. This again is a fairly common pattern of language. The pasuk begins with Vayedech Ishma Beis Lechem Yehuda Lo Gur B'Stei Moav, and then it says in pasuk base, vayavo stemo vayu shom. So what's the meaning of the word logo? What does logo normally mean? A temporary thing, right? We have this in Haggadah, right? This should be familiar to us. The logosham, right? They logosham. They went down there just to sojourn there. I think it's often translated, but the pasuk emphasizes vayusham. They were there, more than just dwelling there. It's not even yeshiva. It's they were there. They become absorbed into the sort of culture of Moav. Okay, so let's move on. So this is establishing the context of the psukim. I want to just at this point mention that food plays an important part in the whole of the Megillah. And again, this is a theme that we're going to visit. We've spoken already that we've always mentioned already that the tension between Elimelech's spiritual needs and his desire, in a way quite legitimately, we can relate to it, to get his family out of a famine situation, and the sort of balance between his responsibilities and so on. The story itself, though, is built round food. Let's again remember the continuation of the story. They come back from Eretz Yisrael, from Moav, and what does Rus have to do? She has to go pleading for food. She has to go begging for food and scrounging around for food. They come back at the time of the harvest. All events of the story really take place in granaries, right? Rus confronts Moav there. Rus confronts Boaz there, and everything takes place around there. And the story takes place, the setting of the Megillah, of this part of the Megillah, which we'll see later, we'll see when they return, is they return at the time of the barley harvest. The whole story takes place now in these few weeks during the Omer, basically straight after the time of the barley harvest. So why am I mentioning this? Again, because the concept of leadership and the concept of food are quite closely linked. Perhaps the most basic responsibility of a king, as I'm saying this, I have a feeling I might mention this last time, is to provide two things for his people. Right? What's the most basic responsibility in theory of government for government? To provide safety, and to provide, in order to wage wars of defense if necessary, and security, and to provide food and sustenance. By the way, etymologically in Hebrew, the word milchama, has as its root lamed chesmem, possibly, which is lechem. There's a number of suggested etymologies for the word milchama, but one suggestion for the etymology of the word milchama is lechem, lamed chesmem in the middle. In this suggestion of the etymology, it's like, for example, makom means a place, but the root of the word is kum, it stands up. So, or mitzvah comes from tzivoy, or mishpat comes from shofet. So milchama means the engagement of bread making, the engagement of the struggle for bread. Most wars are conducted over limited resources and the need to survive.
Because Ukraine is so rich in all sorts of minerals and food, and that's really what it's all about. They never mention that for the Russians.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Wars are almost always about resources. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. By the way, the Torah, interestingly, right at the beginning of the Torah, uses military language to describe the ability of us to master and conquer the world and earn a living from it. In Bereshis pasuk, as we're talking, Perek Aleph pasuk Kafches, Hashem turns to Adam and he says, fill the land and conquer it. So the Torah uses almost military language to describe the mastery of nature and the need to earn a living. By the way, food is quite important. Adam sins with food, so the human relationship with using resources is not a small idea in the sort of in understanding of spiritual development. Okay, let's try and move on. I don't spend too long on the because I don't spend too long on looking at the details of the psukim before we bring out the next theme. Okay, let's move on to the encounter with the marriage with Rus and Arpa, meeting Rus and Arpa. After all, Rus is the eponymous heroine of the story. So let's move to pasuk Daled. So the next two pasukim, basically we're told Vayusham, we saw that then the pasuk base, they are there. I can't emphasize the strength of the word Vayusham. Vayu Shom at the end of Pasuk Base doesn't mean Vayeshvu Shom even. They settle there. There's Logur, which means to sojourn. There's Vayeshvu, which means to settle. Vayu Shom is Yihi as to mean. It's the state of it's to be. I'm sorry. It's the state of being there. Vayu Shom means their being was there. So it's almost like a sort of ontological word, an existential word. Their being was there. Vayu Shom means that they become immersed in a Marvi type behavior.
The Hoffman said about German Jews hating Jerusalem.
Yes, yeah. Jewish history is always a struggle between connecting to the place you are, but not you, Shom, not letting it become your new Jerusalem. 100%. Okay. So Pasuk Gimel describes the death of Elimelech. Pasuk Daled, Vayistilem Noshim Moavius. They marry Moabite women. Shema Achas Orpa, Shema Shenis Rus. Vayeshu Sham Ka'asa Shonim, and they dwell there for 10 years. All I'll say on this is a number of droshes of Chazal. One of them is Orpa. They link to neck, the back of the neck. Orif is in particular the back of the neck. It's interesting in Lashon HaKodesh, the back of the neck has its own Hebrew word. They see this as her Orpa turning her back on her mother-in-law, because Orpa, of course, is the daughter-in-law who doesn't stay loyal to Rus. Rus, they see maybe linked to the word Re'iyos, seeing, that she saw truth, or she saw loyalty, she has a clarity of vision, she stays with Naomi, or perhaps from another root, there's a less common word, recesses, rotet, to shake or to tremble, that she was God-fearing, or perhaps a link to the word revoya, which means thirst, that she was thirsty for spirituality. But that's how Chazal understand these the meaning of these words. In the end, Vayomusu gam shneim Machlon and Chilion. Also, Machlon and Chilion die. Chazal, by the way, whenever it says the word gam, understand that to mean including something extra. So Machlon and Chilion die. They understand that first they're impoverished. So like we find a parallel idea with Saras. It says when Saras afflicts someone, first their home is afflicted, then their garments are afflicted, then the person themselves afflicted. So you see there's a gradual breakdown of Machlon and Chilion's resources and everything else. They're not immediately killed. They're given warning after warning after warning that what you've done to stay in Moav and immerse yourself in Moavi culture isn't working. You need to get back to Eretz Yisrael and take up restore yourself to Judaism and restore yourself to responsibility as leaders. By the way, I don't go into this in too much detail. It's unclear whether Rus and Orpa have converted, in which case this is a halachically legitimate relationship, or they haven't converted to Yiddishkeit, in which case this is an example of intermarriage, in which case the Megillah is dealing with not just abdication of leadership, but an example of assimilation that's taking place. Vayu Shom, and they're marrying Moabite girls, and they're completely deserting their Jewish responsibility. Yes. So one of the reasons in Pshuto Shel Mikra to assume that they were not Geirim or Geiros is because Naomi does her best to discourage them from following her back to Eretz Yisrael. And indeed, as we'll see in a few moments, we learn this is one of the most famous stories in Tanakh of the concept of Giur, of conversion, because what Rus does, and we'll look at this in more detail later, really models the Geirus process, in which initially one tries to discourage and say, why are you doing this? You don't need to do this, until ultimately there's acceptance. So the simplest reading of the story is that Naomi does not think that they are part of the Jewish people, and it's only when Rus says to her, the very famous words, Amich Ami, your people are my people, and so on, after Naomi decides to step back to Eretz Yisrael, and Rus proves her conviction that she wants to stay with her, that she's accepted. So the simplest understanding is that not only that this Yusham, that they were there, is very, very serious. We're talking about a descent from being a shofet, one of the leaders of the Jewish people, Elimelech, down to his children immersing themselves in Moavi culture to such a degree that they enter into a halachic relationship. It's not entirely clear though in the Mefarshim and Chazal as to what's happened here.
Poppy Hill once gave a share tick of their Shavuot,
Yes.
resolving it by saying it was a kind of provisional.
Yes, there are such suggestions. It's not entirely clear halachically exactly what that means, but there is a suggestion that there's a conversion that's happened, but Rus isn't, that Naomi isn't convinced of the sincerity of it, and after the judgment to push them away. It remains an unresolved puzzle in the Megillah, but certainly it doesn't sound like they're what we would call a ger tzedek. It doesn't sound like they are either possibly then there's no gior at all, or there's an unconvincing gior. That's certainly what seems to be from the from the psukim. Okay, we've now finished the first episode. One of the helpful things I got from this book that I mentioned earlier, which I hadn't sort of entirely thought of when I was preparing, is thinking of the story as sort of almost scenes or acts. And we've now reached the close of Act 1, which is Machlon Finnan died, and the Moav story has ended ended badly. Pasuk Vov is now a key turning point, and this pasuk we do need to analyze with some depth. Pasuk 6. Let's read it because it's a slightly difficult pasuk. Vatakom hi v'chaloseha. She and her daughters-in-law got up. Vatoshov mistei Moav, and they returned from the fields of Moav. Hishoma b'stei Moav. Ki prokat Hashem es amo loseis lahem lechem. Because they heard from the fields of Moav that Hashem had visited his people to give to them bread. Pasuk 7. They left the place. Her and her two daughters-in-law with her. And they went on the way to return to the land of Yehuda. Okay, as I said last week, I think I've done enough talking for now. Over to you. Can we analyze together these two psukim, Pasuk Vov and Pasuk Zayin? What do you make of these two psukim? They're very, very difficult psukim. There's structural confusion around them. Very, very serious psukim here, difficult psukim here. And again, I hope online people have their copies of Megillas Rus or on, I think I posted the link last time, memory where you can just follow this inside. What do we make of these two psukim? Is the first half of Pasuk 6 true? She arose with the daughters and thing, and she returns from the fields of Moav. Is that an accurate pasuk? Right. So we'll put that in the negative. Yeah. It's an inaccurate pasuk. Yeah. It's not, the pasuk is not entirely correct. If that's what it said, fine. That's a nice story. She got up and she returned from the fields of Moav. But did she return from the fields of Moav? Well, let's read the continuation of the psukim. No, all she does is she goes out and sets out. So it's unclear the structure of the psukim. It should say Vatokom hi v'chalosea kishama. They got up. Vatetzim and Amakom and then Pasuk Zayin. They left that place. Right? There's an order going on over here. So that's one incongruous aspect of the psukim. Polly, sorry, yes.
I've got an idea. She then arose along with her daughter-in-law to return. It's almost like she's thought about it, and then it tells us she actually goes.
It does sound like it's intentionality. Yeah.
She doesn't go because she has a standing conversation with them, not to come with her.
Okay, so we're going to get back to that, but I do want to pick up on what you said. In Pasuk Vov, in Pasuk 6, you need to look very carefully at the grammar. What's the translation of Vatokom hi v'chaloseha? What's Vatokom? She got up in the singular, the same form as we had earlier. She got up and her daughters-in-law. So it's very similar to before. It should say in the plural, and they got up. It doesn't say, it says, and she got up and her daughters-in-law. And yet, by the time you get to Pasuk Zayin, as you correctly deduced, Polly, her two daughters-in-law with her, it does sound like a more harmonious journey. Again, back into the plural, they went on the way. So they're now unified in the travel at this point. Yeah.
They're not going to come up with the idea because they don't even know.
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe she arose was actually came up with the idea that she would go.
So this lends credence to the idea that the actual travel back, there's a degree of equality in this, but the kima, the getting up, seems to be about her. It seems that this getting up over here is a psychological getting up. Vatokom, she sort of pulled herself upwards. She got up. If it's referring to the travel, it doesn't quite fit in because it's Pasuk Zion, which is the travel process, and not Pasuk Vav yet. So it seems at this moment she's sort of she's pulling herself together. She's taking responsibility. She's going to now do something different to what's happened till now. Yes, sorry.
She's just lost her husband and 2 sons.
Yes.
But could it be she got up because she was sitting Shiva and not her daughters-in-law? And so she got up from sitting Shiva and then she decided.
So the suggestion for those online is that the Vatokum is literally getting up from Shiva. Whether it means literally Shiva or not, I don't know. But it definitely, and this is my point, it has connotations of that. She's hit rock bottom. Everything's fallen apart. She's completely alone. Look at Pasuk Hey. She's left over from her husband and her 2 children. So she's in a very, very dark place. And now she pulls herself up. She gets up. It could be literally she gets up from mourning, or more generally gets up from the complete wreck of her life, in which everything's fallen apart. She left a prestigious aristocratic lady with her family, and now she's completely alone in that. Let's have a look at the second part of the pasuk. Is she returning because of pragmatic reasons? The famine is over. Is that the translation of the pasuk? The famine's over, so now she'll go back. It does sound a bit like a teshuvah process over here. This is the first time, by the way, one of the few times that the name of Hashem appears in the Megillah, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. And what does it remind us of? Pokat Hashem. Where do we know that phrase from? Hashem Pokat. Sorry, Pokat means visit. It's quite a unique turn of phrase. We read this on Rosh Hashanah, right? When Sarah is visited by Hashem and she's given childhood, she's given having a child, she's given Yitzchak. So it doesn't. I don't think Pshat in the pasuk is she hears the famine's over, so she'll go back to Eretz Israel. It's she hears that Hashem has revisited the Jewish people and granted them reprieve, and now she's going to go back to Eretz Israel. I think there's another diuk in the pasuk also, by the way, which also indicates that this isn't just a physical return. Look at the second part of pasuk Zion. How does it describe what they're doing? They went on the way. Why? Loshuv el Eretz Yehuda, to go back to the land of Yehuda. Any problems with them going back to the lands of Yehuda?
Well, the daughter-in-laws have.
Daughter-in-laws have never been there. So what sort of return is this, right? She's returning, but they're not returning to Eretz Yehuda. So it sounds like what's going on over here is not just a sort of physical return. Oh, the famine's over, so let's go back. It does sound like there's a sort of restoration, a cultural return happening, a return back to Eretz Yehuda, a recognition that Hashem has revisited, a desire to reconnect. I think that's. I don't think this is medrash. I think this is something real happening over here. If you like, this is the return from the Vayusham, which rang so loudly in our ears at the end of Pasuk Beis. So at the end of Pasuk Beis, Vayusham, and they were there, implies that they're really identified with Moav. By the way, is Naomi guilty of that sin also? Has she also identified with Moav in Pasuk Beis and Pasuk 2? I think so. Look at the structure of the Pasukim. Shema Isheni Melach, Shem Ishtunam, Shem Shnei Vanav Machlim Chilyon, Vayavo Shnei Mo, Vayusham. So it sounds like Naomi is also Vayusham, maybe a little bit against her will. I'm not Chas v'Shalom criticizing her. We saw in the earlier Pasuk that she sort of dragged along by her husband, but nonetheless, she is there. Lamaisa, she's there. Now Vatokum, she gets up, so she's no longer sitting there. She's no longer yeshiva there. There's no longer a dwelling there. She's now getting up. So she's pulling herself up from the mourning process, as you put it, the shiva. She's pulling herself up from this rock bottom place she's reached, and she's pulling herself, out of Moav. Why? Because Pokat Hashem, that she's recognizing there's a reconnection with Hakadosh Baruch Hu.
The word Amma feels to me a little bit more third-personish. As if she's not.
Sorry, which word are you focusing on? Yes.
It just feels a bit like she's not including herself at that stage, and as if now that she's heard that Hashem has forgiven his people, now I'm going to go and see if I can be included again, if I can be part of it because they've been forgiven and because there's food available. I don't know, it doesn't feel so much like it's a complete teshuvah for the sake of it spiritually to me.
I made a note of your diuk. The diuk that was just said for those online is Amo Pakat Hashem Amo, Hashem has visited his people. She doesn't say Pakat Hashem Amo, Hashem has visited her people. It does sound a bit of a distance. I don't know, I want to think about that, but maybe that's reflecting this indeed this fact that she's somewhat distant. She's become Vayusham, she's become somewhat herself immersed in Moav. Again, she's a Sadekas, not necessarily her fault, but Vayusham, she's settled by influence of her husband to actually be there. So maybe there is a distance being reflected in this. Okay, so this is stage 2 of the story. Let's now move to stage 3, which is the very, very famous conversations with her daughters-in-law on the way. Let's have a look at Pasuk Ches, Pasuk 8. Vatomer namini shnei chalusea, leichna go, shovna ishel beis ima. Let each person return to the house of her mother. It seems here she's punning the return. She's saying, you think you're returning to Eretz Yisrael, but that's delusion, my dear daughters-in-law. You're Moavias. You were never there in Eretz Yisrael. Don't fool yourself. Where should you go back to? You should go back to your mother's house. Go back home. That's your real home. One other point maybe I'll just mention in this pasuk is the Kriya Ksiv. I know of no Megillah that has, or psukim, there's so many Kriya Ksivs in Megillas Rus. If we have time, maybe we'll explore this idea. But just to explain what that term means and how it works, there are occasions in Tanakh where a word is miswritten, as it were, or misspelt. In other words, the Kri, the reading of the word, differs from the Ksiv of the word, the word which is written. And the Mefarshim adopt a stance in which they say that which is written is what on an external level is taking place. Sorry, that which is read is that which on an external level is taking place. What's said is what's externally taking place. That which is written is referring to a sort of inner layer of meaning. So over here, just an example of this is let's look at Pasuk 8 again. Naomi says to her 2 daughters-in-law, Leichna, go, shovna ishtal beis ima. Let each person return to the house. Yas Hashem imochem chesed kashal sisem imamesim v'modi, which translates as in the pronounced form it's Yas, in the written form it's Yaseh. Yas Hashem means Hashem should do with you. So she's saying to the daughters, Hashem should do with you chesed. Yaseh means Hashem will do, Hashem shall do. In other words, it will happen. So it may be that this is she's saying Hashem should do chesed, but the anonymous voice of the Rus, the editor's voice, the storyteller's voice, who of course is the Novi who's telling us the story, in this case Shmuel, the author, is saying Hashem will do it. It's not a request. Hashem should do, but Hashem will do. Almost a prediction. Yes.
Anything about the fact that it's the house of their mother, rather than usually it's you go to your father. Usually that's your father.
That's the other. I don't know. The house, the Medrash says that these are princesses. They're the house of. They grew up in the house of a king. In which case, maybe this is saying, I'm not talking to you about you returning on a national level. I'm talking about you returning to the personal home. But I don't know. I haven't.
Does it come up anywhere else? Is there anywhere else that it's the mother's house?
Also, a good question. I don't know. Good. These are the good points. Again, for those online, I'm just being asked about the language of Beis Ima returning to the house of the mother. Maybe the house of the parents, I should have said, or even house of father. I don't know. Good point. Let's move on. Again, just in the interest of time. I don't. Maybe I'll leave this as a little bit of homework. I'll just point out a grammatical feature, and then people can take this away and look at this. There are two words in Hebrew for with you, im and s. So itcha and imcha, with you and with you. The structural form seems to be, and this is the way the Vilna Gaon lays it out, that im means a complete togetherness, whereas imcha means completely together with, whereas itcha means a functional togetherness. You're going together with someone on the same way, but there's not a genuine togetherness with that. If you're traveling with family, you might say you're traveling im mishpacha. If you're traveling with a colleague, maybe you'll say itzchem. So or imo and so on. There is seemingly deliberate playing in the Megillah with the degree of relationship that's going on. So the Vatokom is in the singular form. She got up. She's the one who has the energy and the inspiration to get up, and her resolve inspires them to follow. Then they go, and now they're going Imma. They're going with her. Pasuk 7. They're going completely with her. She tries to push them off, and they respond. Pasuk Yud Vatoman Allah. They say to her, Ki itoch noshuv la'amecha. With you, the lower form of with you, we will go with go to your people. So it could well be the translation. Just to set this in context, sorry, maybe I should just step back and give a little bit of a bigger context to here. Basically, there's 2 rounds of dissuasion, or if you look more carefully, 3 rounds of dissuasion that Naomi engages in. In round 1, she says to them, go back, and they both refuse. They say, no, we want to stay with you. In round 2, she says to them, go back, why are you coming with me? This is ridiculous. And Orpah turns back. In round 3, she again tries to push Rus back, and Rus resists, and then she desists, she stops. There seems to be a transition after round 1 in which she says to them, round 1 is Pasuk Ches, Pasuk Tes, Pasuk 8 and 9, in which she says to them, go back, and they reply in Pasuk 10, no, we are going with you, but with a lesser form of with you, itcha, will go. So it seems to me like there's some degree of effect her words have, and they no longer feel as included in things, but nonetheless, they say on a function level, we're going to go with you. Naomi then tries again, and this is Pasuk 11 and 12 and 13. And this time in Pasuk 14, Orpah indeed turns back and Rus continues. And then again, Naomi tries for a 3rd time to push her off, and again Rus persists, and at that point Naomi gives up. Okay, we're going to analyze this in a little bit more detail shortly. But incidentally, this is where the famous, the source of the halacha, that one tries to push off a potential candidate for gerus 3 times, and then if it doesn't go anymore, then one leaves it. One doesn't try and push off anymore. These are the 3 times that they try and push off. Now, pasuk. So round 1 of trying to push off is she appeals to them by saying, go back home. And this has no effect on the 2 of them. Round 2, she says to them, you've got nothing of hope in the future. In other words, round 1, she says, go back home, go back to be with your mother. Maybe in answer to your question, she thinks that being back home with the mother will be more appealing to them. They're homesick. Go back home to mum, go back home to mummy, and you'll be happier there. So in round 1, she appeals to them to go back home because of their go back home. It's simple. In round 2, she says, you've got no future with me. What do you think of Pasuk Yud Aleph, Pasuk 11 and Pasuk 12? Have a look at that in the Hebrew. The English, Naomi says, return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Am I going to have further children that they can be husbands for you? Go back. I'm too old to get remarried. That even were I to bear sons, there's no future for me. What's going on in this pasuk? What's Naomi's point over here? How's she understanding their motive, and what does she think? What does she think is going on over here?
Being able to fulfill you.
She can't foresee being able to fulfill Yibum with her. I think that's the answer in one.
The weird thing's true. I have a son now.
It's a most weird thing to say. You said in your brief comments, both the question and the answer really that I wanted to bring out of it. The question I wanted to ask is, this is the most bizarre posuk imaginable. She's turning to her daughters-in-law and she's saying, the only reason I can imagine you coming with me this is round 2 of her attempt to push them off, is because it went so well last time when you married my kids. So you think, what a great shidduch, let me marry them again. But listen, that's delusional. I mean, it's going to take. I'm too old to have a child. In other words, she's picturing them as imagining. You're going to go back to Israel. I'll get remarried. I'll have 2 children. You'll be able to marry them again, and Shalom Alisrael. Like what? Well, we'll all be one happy family. So it's a most remarkable and bizarre posuk. Ah, excellent. Yes, absolutely. That's exactly. Golly, giving the share. Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. What's going on over here, and don't forget, we know the punchline of the story, and this is the 3rd theme that I wanted to bring out, the next big theme. I said that I wanted to try and start analyzing some psukim and arrive somewhere with the next big theme. The next big theme of Megillas Rus is the concept of Yibum. And if Megillah, this is an overwhelming concept. I'm struggling to think where to begin in this, but let me just try and structure it in a reasonable way. First of all, just the definition of terms. There is a concept in halacha, one of the most difficult and mysterious and mystical ideas we can comprehend, that if a married couple, ends up, the man dies without having brought children into the world, there is a responsibility on the wife, who after all committed herself to this relationship, to somehow continue his family line with Yibum, with marrying a close relative, normally the sibling of the deceased, the brother of the deceased man, and that way continuing his line. Now, there's a lot to ponder in this halacha, which we're not going to go into, but it is a story that occurs several times in Tanakh, this sort of concept. And every time it occurs, it's linked to this family, very, very interestingly. Okay, let's step back though and just try and understand what's happening over here. First of all, we know, because we're privy to the end of the story, that Yibum is exactly what occurs. Rus ends up marrying a kinsman of Elimelech and the deceased husband, and continuing the family lineage. This is what I was saying to you when we mentioned Elimelech, that Elimelech is dreaming of being the ancestor of kings, and in a strange way, he does sort of become that, even though he dies and he doesn't become the ancestor of kings, but his kinsman does, and somehow his family line is continued into producing David HaMelech. So the peak of the story, if you really wanted to ask, we've asked this question 5 or 6 times now, what is the story of Rus about? One way of summarizing the story is, it's a story of a family line restored. It's a story of Yibum. Because when you look at the structure of the narrative, that's exactly what happens. The end of the story reaches its climax with Yibum, an amazing thing. With Rus saying, I'm going to carry on my family line by marrying an otherwise unsuitable husband, Boaz, who's far older than her and a leader of the Jewish people. She's this stranger, impoverished ex-Moabite who's come to Eretz Yisrael, and she marries Boaz, the Gadol Hador. We'll get to the character of Boaz a little later, and he's an extraordinary figure. And Yibum occurs. She carries on the family line. So Naomi is sensing that they're going with her because they feel a commitment and a loyalty to keep her family going. And she says to them, "Don't be ridiculous. Yibum isn't going to occur."
You were speaking before about whether they were true gaming or not true gaming. Not be that she's saying, look, you don't know B'nai Israel, but they're not going to accept you as gaming. Nobody's going to marry you. The only person who could marry you is if I was to have a child, and that's not going to happen.
I think that's also what's going on. I think the Megillah is an exploration of a moral corrosion that seems to occur, in which there's a rejection of Rus. And we'll get to that later. One of the diukim we'll see later in the Psukim is that after her Geirus program, she arrives, she ceases to being, on the journey, she ceases to be Rus HaMoaviyah, and she gets there in Israel, and suddenly she's referred to as a Moaviyah again, which is against halacha, right? It's exactly the opposite of what the concept of Geirus is, in which you don't anymore reference someone. On the contrary, now you're a full member of Klal Yisrael. But nonetheless, that does occur. So I think one of the themes, we'll get to that theme later, is a rejection of Rus and a casting of aspersions about her motives over here. But I think that Yibum is a central feature of this story, structurally, that goes on in the Megillah. It's referenced, I think, over here by Naomi in her very attempt to send us back. She says to us, Yibum will never happen, but by the end of the story, Yibum does happen. And again, as Polly correctly pointed out, the famous story, the first story of Yibum, the other famous Yibum story that takes place in the Torah, which is the story of Yehuda and his two sons, and Tamar, of course, is the ancestor of who? Boaz and Elimelech, and the ancestor of David, the very person who Rus is going to end up marrying. So there's a family tradition of Yibum over here, right? This is the family. If we had to give a bigger picture of what Yibum was, if we had to step back from the so many questions that form in our minds about this idea of a widow marrying her husband's brother and all that, how would we summarize the concept of Yibum? What is Yibum about? I don't think so. I think it's something. I think it's on the most raw level. Yes, it's to do with loss of status, to do with loss of land. But I think there's something else happening here. Yeah, it is consolation is edging closer to it. It's retying, reconnecting, re-sewing together a ruptured link. Right. If you think of a shalsheles, a chain that really, in some ways. One way of viewing Jewish history is as a shalshelet, a chain from Matan Torah through to, which is the sowing of a potential, the Torah, through to the perfection of the world. The chain has got snapped. The family lineage has got broken. We're going to stitch it together. It's beginning to sound very redemptive. It's beginning to sound messianic, right? It's repairing a broken link, right? And that is what's going on over here. We're talking about the birth of David and the restoration of kingship to the Jewish people, and ultimately Moshiach ben David, ultimately return and the repair of things. So we're dealing here, when Yibum occurs, it's a repair and a restitching and a reattachment of a ruptured bond. Now, the reason why your points were correct about return of lands and status and so on is because lands isn't just lands in halacha. This isn't about return of lands in Henzen. This is about return of a Chelek and a Nachal in Eretz Yisrael. The Torah vision of society is Eretz Yisrael, the lands of Yisrael, where each person has their own place, where you're linked to your Shvatim. The Shvatim, in Torah sort of vision, you live in concentric circles of family, where each Shevet has a region in Eretz Yisrael. Then the regions are broken up into sub-portions which are allocated to the Jews enter into Eretz Yisrael at the time of Yeshua, and then their descendants begin dividing it. So if you think about it logically, my portion in Eretz Yisrael is next to that of my siblings, who inherited it from my father, and he in turn is next to that of his siblings, because of course he divided that. So you end up with circles of, I live next to my siblings, and then I have my cousins around me, and then I have my second cousins around them, and then third cousin around that, till you spread out to the Shevet, and then ultimately to the whole of the Jewish people, because that's the vision of what a concept of Nachla does, this sort of concept of unity and so on. So when you're restoring Eretz Yisrael, the land, and you're also restoring the family back to it. By the way, what's the Hebrew term that's used later on in the Megillah for the restorer of this family lineage and the land? He's referred to as Goyal, right? Goyal. So it's a redeemer. That it's explicit that this is a redemptive thing going on. In some ways, the very concept of Gerus and conversion is that idea. It's also a restoration of souls that were part of the Jewish people and for some reason fragmented off and are now coming back and being brought back in. So I think this is a very important posuk over here, in which Naomi is saying, dream on about Yibum. You're not going. My family line is ruptured. It's broken. We're finished. We're history. You have this nice, naive, sweet, simplistic, spiritual ideal that you're somehow going to be able to repair things. Nonsense. It's simply this is not going to happen. We're irreparably and irrevocably broken. Point number one. Point number two, maybe also she's questioning their motives a little bit. There is a sort of theme over here, which may again tie into returning the house of your mother. And maybe part of what she's saying is, And this maybe is a deeper question always when we look at chesed. We haven't had time yet to explore in these psukim. She does mention chesed a couple of times. What really motivates you? We could give a different interpretation to this whole story. They're lonely. They want to have children. Why does one want to have children? Just because of high ideal values of continuing the chain of tradition and linking the families, or because of our own motives, our own needs, our own emotional wants? Maybe there's a sentimentality going over here, familiarity. She says to them, I know you've got to know my family and now this feels safe, but go back home and you'll have another route to do this. Okay, so to summarize the final theme that we've tried to bring out for today's share, the big theme over here is, I think it's unavoidable that what's happening here is reminding us of the ends of the story, in which she does end up marrying a family of Naomi, her mother-in-law, not children, obviously, but a family of Naomi, and she does end up restoring the broken lineage of Elimelech and Machlon and Chilion, and she does do another Yibum, which is going to be one of the two Yibums which are critical in the formation of the restoration of Menach Mashiach. And it's not coincidence. If the job of Mashiach is to reattach broken chains, then we understand why this is it's also the bringing of Mashiach into the world. Surely, someone's asking me over here, surely if, a good question, important question, surely if Rus had not been a Geras when she first married, then how would there be any sort of Yibum connection or obligation over here? This is part of the problem, and one of the sources of the idea, there must have been some sort of relationship. However we understand this exactly halachically, it's clear that on some level she has genuinely connected to the family of Elimelech, and somehow is genuinely, there is a meeting of souls, there's a genuine being part of the family, which is what leads to the idea of maybe there's something over here which hovers uneasily being a gerus, but not a gerus in some shape or form. Okay, so we've run out of time for today, so we'll stop. Sorry, yeah. The very ancestor of the founding of Shevet Yehuda, and the person who is the ancestor of Boaz and Elimelech and all the characters in this story, is Yehuda, who does a Yibum with Tamar, in which, again, the failed marriage of his children is restored and brought back into existence by Yehuda and Tamar. Next week, yeah, sorry, Polly.
Do what we do today, which is often name a child after
Yes. Yes.
lost with deceased. And if Ruth's son is not referred to as anything to do with her husband, we don't know which one of those two sons were her husband. And also it's the same with Tamar. Tamar is not.
Yes. So our naming after and giving a name is a pale imitation of the pasuk in Yibum explicitly says that they stand on the Shem Hameis, on the name of the deceased person, the continuation of the name of the deceased, but not just with a relative gesture, which is naming after, but by a fundamental continuation, in which case they don't need to be named after because this is a real continuity. There's a pasuk, I wasn't going to go into this in too much detail, but there is a pasuk in the very end of the Megillah, so chapter 4, pasuk 17, the child is born. Vatikach Naomi es hayeled. Naomi takes the child. She holds the child against her chest. And she becomes his nurse. Now, it's very unclear to know what the pasuk means. In what way does she nurse the child? Does this literally mean she's nursing the child, or she's adopting the child? Very unclear. But then carries on. The neighboring women give this child a name, Lamer saying, Yulad ben Naomi. A child has been born to Naomi. And then Vatikreno Shmoy Oved, etc. And they call his name Oved. So they're clearly seeing this as a continuation of Naomi's line, of Naomi's dynasty, of Naomi's line. By the way, again, since I've mentioned this, and probably you raised this point, and with this I'll conclude because I don't want to keep people too far over time. We mentioned already that when you have a child or the desire of having children, maybe part of what Naomi is questioning over here is this lishma or not? There's nothing criminal about wanting to enjoy the experience of having a child, but is it really about Yibum? Is it really about a sort of completely sincere desire to continue the family dynasty? By the way, the reason we stopped the practice of Yibum nowadays is because of questions over sincerity of motive. Yibum has to be performed completely lishma. Why does it have to be performed completely lishma? Because in a way, it's the most lishma action possible. And Rus is the most extreme example of Yibum imaginable, in which she's giving birth to a child who isn't going to be called by anyone, even a child. It's going to be so much. Can you imagine the psychology over here, right? You think of dynamics of a daughter-in-law giving birth, and then her mother-in-law takes the child, and everyone says, "Oh, this is her mother-in-law's child," and the mother-in-law's nursing the child. And where's Rus in this story, right? Now, of course, Rus becomes Ein HaMelech, right? She becomes the queen mother, quite literally. But she's paid that she's given birth in the most lishma manageable manner imaginable, in which this child is so much a continuation of the dynasty that the neighbors don't even view this child as Russes, they view the child as Nami. Okay, so this is and it takes that to repair a broken link, by the way, right? You can only repair a broken chain with a complete Lishma Yibum. But for now, we've engaged in some more analysis of Sukkim and hopefully seen another theme emerge from Sefer Rus, which we'll continue to explore next week. I'm getting a bit panicky about finishing Rus in time for Shavuot. We may have to carry on this mini series after Shavuot also. Yes. We do the negative version of Yibum, which is the quasi-divorce of Chalitza. So since there's an attachment that exists, a responsibility that remains in the marriage, the widow in this situation can't get remarried stum. Either they have to make a decision to continue the line. It's not just solely their decision, I mean, it's dependent on them, or they engage in a quasi-divorce, which is known as chalitza. We don't allow it in Yibum to occur anymore, though there are communities that did allow it. And we're talking about even the medieval era, so this isn't about modern sensibilities, which maybe struggle with the whole idea, whatever it is. But one of the bases in halacha is there is a halachic opinion of Abba Shaul, one of the Tanoim, who says that halachically Yibum is forbidden unless it's done with complete sincerity, completely lishma. We don't paskin that far, but the value behind it is certainly there, that Yibum is only appropriate if it's a lishma action, and that's one of the reasons given by the poskim for the cessation of Yibum. Yes. Yes, normally, so this is a complex halachic matter, but the summary is normally this would be considered one of the forbidden relatives because they are too closely related to one. The whole point over here is that in marrying the brother of one's deceased husband, one's continuing the very closeness is the reason for continuing the dynastic chain. It's beyond the scope of this discussion to discuss all the halachas of Yibum. The technical halacha of Yibum is only with the closest relative, brother of spouse. However, the concept of Yibum we find here in the Rus story and in the Tama story is even a broader, slightly more distant relative, and again, it's used also in the philosophical terms, one of the examples of how there can be halachic concepts and then more broad sort of philosophical or mashava, spiritual ideas that are broader than them. Okay, we'll stop here. I wish everyone again, thank you for your patience, and I wish everyone a good day. Thank you so much for joining. Sorry?
Thank you.